Before we begin this Microsoft Digital event, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we live and work throughout Australia, as well as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people viewing this event today. We pay our respects to elders, both past, present and emerging, and recognise and celebrate their continuing connection to land, waters and community. Our reverence also extends to all First Nation and Indigenous peoples, as well as their ancestral lands.
Hey everybody, it's time for another great episode of New Breakpoint. My name's Simon Waite. Welcome to today's show. If you want to ask any questions of our guest, who I'll introduce in a moment during the show today, make sure you use the chat window that'll be showing during the session. We'll have a live Q&A at the end of the show where some of the more complicated or interesting questions will be discussed between myself and our host for today. Keep an eye on your inbox for follow-ups to the show, where we'll send you links of how you can share the video with others in your community or team. And as always, make sure that you contribute in a friendly and positive manner to the discussions that we have during our shows. My guest for today is Damian Brady from GitHub. GitHub's been doing some great stuff over the last little while, so we thought it would be a great opportunity to dig in and uncover some of the hidden gems and some of the gems that you maybe heard about and look at them in a bit more detail with Damian from GitHub. So without further ado, I'm going to hop off the stream and hand over to Damian, and he's going to run us through some of the latest news and announcements from GitHub.
Hey folks, thanks Simon for introducing me. Really good to be back here. I think last time I was here I was talking about ML ops or something like that. As Simon mentioned, my name's Damian Brady and I am a developer advocate for GitHub. So one of the things that I did last year was go to GitHub Universe. I was lucky enough to speak in the keynote and be one of the hosts. I was like the roaming host, which was definitely a different skill set. But there were a huge number of things that we announced at GitHub Universe last year. So what I thought I'd do today is go through not just the things that we've announced at GitHub Universe, but also touch on a couple of things that have come out since then that are very exciting as well. The easiest way for me to do this would be to go through the blog post. And I mentioned that there are a ton of things that we introduced. So I'm not going to read through all of the blog post. I just want to kind of hit on a few highlights. But if you do want to see all of the details, have a look for this blog post. It's on github.blog and just search for everything new from GitHub Universe 2022. We'll put the link in the show notes as well. So one of the most talked about features at the moment that GitHub offers is GitHub Copilot. Now you might have seen GitHub Copilot demoed in a few different places. Essentially, it's a great way of reducing the busy work that you're doing, the kind of boilerplate code that you have to do every day, and give you time to work on the easier thing, or not the easier thing, sorry, the stuff that's more important, how you're putting your software together and things like that. Now, GitHub Copilot is based on OpenAI's Codex, which is a descendant of GPT-3. So basically, it understands what code looks like and helps you write code that helps you with all of those boilerplate, the busy work that you don't want to do. We publish a list of libraries, languages that it works really well with, but realistically, it's just a language understanding tool. So as long as there's enough training data, and there's a huge amount of training data, it's trained on billions and billions of lines of code. As long as there's enough training data, it's going to work for whatever language you want. Now, it's good for a bunch of things. I'm not going to go into too many details about what Copilot is good for, but needless to say, it does a great job of saving you time. We did a bunch of surveys and a bunch of studies around whether Copilot was actually beneficial to people and whether it made them happier, essentially. Developer happiness being the aim of the whole thing. And we found that not only did it make developers happier in their jobs, their day-to-day jobs, but it was more productive. So in one experiment, we split a bunch of people, I think it was about 95 people, into two groups and gave them the same task, which was to build a web server using JavaScript. And we controlled for as many things as we possibly could. And we found that the team that was, or the people who are able to use Copilot outperforms the ones who weren't able to use Copilot. Now, the completion rate was about the same. The team with Copilot, or the people with Copilot, finished at 78% of the time. The people without Copilot finished at 70% of the time, which is not hugely, not massively dramatic. What was dramatic, though, was when it was completed, the people with Copilot completed it about 60% faster than the ones who didn't. So almost twice as quickly, or more than twice as quickly as the people who didn't. So what that indicates is that all of the looking things up and trying to work out how the code is supposed to work can be cut dramatically by using tools like GitHub Copilot. If you want to know more about that research, there are details on the blog, and again, we'll put something in the show notes so you can have a look. One of the big announcements with Copilot, though, and I'll scroll down and see if I can find it, is the release of Copilot for Business. So we announced it at GitHub Universe, but it became available shortly afterwards. So Copilot is available for individuals, $10 a month or $100 per year, but also you can buy it for your users of your business. This gives you a little bit more control over license management and then organization-wide policy management. So things like whether the prompts that are given to the people using Copilot are able to match publicly available code, or whether those matches get used to train Copilot as well. So it gives you a bit more control over that as well. So Copilot for Business is available, one of the things that we're asked for a lot. Now, GitHub Copilot, just to put it in context, is one of the things that's come out of a project or a team called GitHub Next. There's a great session at GitHub Universe that you can go back and watch by Kyle Daigle about GitHub Next and some of the things we're looking at for the future of software development. Now, Copilot was one of the efforts from GitHub Next, but it's not the only one. One of the other ones you can try at the moment is code brushes. And this is a fantastic way of kind of, it's almost like applying a Photoshop brush to your code. It's definitely worth playing with. Hey GitHub was the other one that made an appearance at the, as well, from one of the people on my team, Rizal on my team, introduced Hey GitHub, which is voice for GitHub Copilot essentially. So you don't need a keyboard if you can't use one for whatever reason. There's also a few other things like GitHub Copilot CLI, GitHub Blocks, which you will see if you look at that demo by Kyle Daigle as well. If you're interested, there are a ton of different things on the radar for not just Copilot, but other things that we're trying with GitHub as well. Test Pilot's a super fantastic one as well. Definitely worth a try. Crafting unit tests that try to cover all of the edges and things like that using Copilot and some other technology. So have a look at GitHub Next. That's githubnext.com, really easy to find. All right, some of the other things that got announced. Some advancements to GitHub projects. So if you haven't heard about the new GitHub projects, it's basically a rewritten way of organizing, planning and tracking all of the work that you've got. Now, projects are at an organization level. So that means you can pull in tasks and issues from all sorts of different repositories. And you can also have draft issues too. There are a few things that are new, and the team there does an incredible job of releasing really new, great features every couple of weeks. Just to show you how easy it is, I'm going to just do a new one. Yeah, so let's have a look at a new project. Stream. I do a lot of these things. So let's just create a new table view. And the great thing is you can add issues from lots of different orgs. So let's add from the Arcade Invaders one. There's no issues there. That's not a great one then. Let's add from my $1 billion startup. So we need a new login link, and I'm just hitting enter at this point, and it lets me add a few really easily. Not just issues, but also pull requests. And you have a lot of customization around how this appears. Again, this could be an hour-long talk by itself. I've done hour-long talks of this. I've done 4-hour workshops on this as well. But you get a lot of control over what you see here. You can add new fields of different types. You can manage your iterations if you're running sprints. You can do all sorts of stuff. And this project is set up so that your team can collaborate however you want. There are also a number of views. So there's a table view and a board view. So a board view is great for sprint management, so your sprint planning and your sprint backlogs. And there's also another view that we announced. Now, to show you that, I'm just going to really quickly just do something over here so you can't see it. Bear with me for 1 sec. All right. There's a couple of things I can't show you, so I had to do a little bit of smoke and mirrors then. So there's another view you can do, which is a roadmap view. So we announced this at Universe as well, and it's something that we have been asked for a lot. So let's say we looked at our login link and said that has a, we need an iteration field. So let's do a new iteration field, call it sprint. Great, save and create that. So then create a new iteration. Sorry, let's just add that to this iteration, for example. And then have another one which starts here, for example. Now we can link these together. I'll have to work out exactly how to do that, but it gives us a nice view of what tasks depend on other tasks. It's really handy for our planning and tracking, obviously. So it means that we can visualize our tasks in the kind of Gantt view that project managers in particular are familiar with. Now, obviously, huge number of things you can do with boards. These are available for everybody as well. This is not a paid addition to any repository, sorry, any organization. So you can just start using projects for anything. The other great thing about it is you don't actually need issues. You can do draft issues. So these ones are pulled from your repositories, but a draft issue is one that is just an idea that you have, and it's not actually linked to any of your repositories. So we internally, we use projects for a ton of stuff, and quite often we'll just have an entire project full of draft issues. Really, really useful stuff. One quick other thing that I want to show you on here as well is the new task lists. So if we edit and create a new task list, we can have a number of like subtasks, essentially. This is probably a bad example because it's a pull request. Let's just go to our issue here, drop down missing. And we can see we have a task list here. So we have a task which has been turned into an issue, but then we have another task which is just an item that needs to be completed. Now, if we edit this, not edit that, but edit it here, open a new tab. We can edit this, let's say edit that description, add a new task list. See as well, by the way, we can see that there are two tasks. Other task here. Now there are 3 tasks, and we can see which ones are done and which ones aren't. So if we mark that one as complete, we can see that progress, 1 of 3 tasks done. We can also, like I implied, we can also convert each of these tasks to an issue. So it means we can break down each of our issues into sub-issues and things like that. If we drill into one of these sub-issues, we can see that it is tracked by issue number 8, which was the parent issue. So we have this hierarchy of issues there. Super useful for planning all your work. There is constantly more being released by this team. They're very, very productive, let's say, with releasing powerful, useful issues. Projects is one of my favorite features in GitHub. I love them all, obviously, but projects, wow, I wish I had this when I was doing dev in anger a few years ago. So that's planning and tracking stuff. GitHub Actions was something I spoke about at Universe myself in the keynote, and there are a number of things that we announced there. In particular, or a few highlights, there are more powerful GitHub hosted runners. So you have the option when you're running Actions workflows of running them on GitHub hosted runners, so infrastructure that runs your actions in the cloud, so you don't need to worry about your own infrastructure, or you can self-host. Now, previously, we never really gave you much of an option over the hosted runners, aside from what operating system they ran. So you could run Windows, Mac OS, or Linux. Now we have the option of larger hosted runners, or more options with hosted runners. So if you need a hosted runner, so you don't want to manage the infrastructure yourself, but you want a hosted runner that has a huge amount of RAM or a huge amount of disk space, you can add those to your project, to your org, and let them get used. So let's have a look at, actually I won't use Octa Academy, let's use Damian Brady Inc. Have a bit more control over that one. We'll go to settings and go to actions. And we can see in runners, we have GitHub hosted runners, and then we have our larger runners. So these are ones that I created, which are 64 cores and 256 gig of RAM. Now, at the moment, there's no workflows used there, but if you wanted to make changes to that or create a new one, you can set things like auto scaling, create runner groups, add labels, even assign unique static IP addresses for those runners if you need to communicate outside of the network and things. Now, these are just larger runners that are still hosted by GitHub, so you have that control as well. There is more coming in this space as well, so keep an eye out for that. Another thing we announced was the GitHub Actions importer. Now, this is a tool that can be used to import from other CI/CD systems, or other CI/CD systems to import those workflows into GitHub Actions. Now, they set an aim, I believe the team set an aim of about 80% of workflows being able to be imported automatically. They've run it, or they've been trying this with a number of organizations to try and get it to work really effectively. And they found a little more than 90% of workflows have been migrated automatically. So that means picking up the workflows that you have in whichever system you have, and there are a number that we support, and importing them into GitHub Actions, action by action to make sure they do exactly the same thing. That one, definitely have a look for that, GitHub Actions importer. One of the other small things that got announced is ARM development tools natively in the hosted runners too. So that means that you can build for much more IoT stuff as well. So I'll admit I don't know a huge amount about that, but IoT builds and development certainly possible with GitHub Actions now as well. Now, since Universe, there's actually been a couple of really interesting things that have come out with GitHub Actions too. They're very highly requested items as well. So one of them is having, if we have a look at our general settings, having required workflows in your organization. So we've often been asked, in my organization, people can create their own repositories and their own workflows, but we want to make sure they always run a security vulnerability check or something like that. Now you can do that. So at your organization level, you can basically set a number of workflows that are required to be run in all the repositories in that organization. This is great for organizations with high levels of governance and requirements around that. So that is one of the things that's come up. One of the other things that's come up, which is very highly requested too, and I'll just jump into a repository to show you this. Let's jump into my haikus for code spaces and have a look at the action settings here. Sorry, not actions. We want secrets and variables. So I've often been asked as well, how do I store variables for my environments? Now, previously, you basically had to store them as secrets or in configuration files in your code. There was no concept of a variable specific to an environment that wasn't secret. So now there is. So you can have environment variables. If we manage our environments, have staging and production, let's say staging has a variable, and this is, our server name, and this is not secret. That variable can be applied to an environment, and it means that we can update it. So with secrets, I can't read what the value of that Azure Publishing Profile variable is, but I can read and reset what the server name variable is. It might seem like a really small thing, but it is something that people have asked for a very long time. So that's there now. We can save variables against environments to use them. A couple of things from actions there. One of the other great things that came out was in security. So there are a number of things that got released there. One of the really cool ones was private vulnerability reporting. So what this does is it allows people in your community to privately, or without having to be a member of an organization, but privately alert an organization to a security vulnerability. Now, it's a little hard to demo because I have to be in a user that doesn't have permission to get in here, so I can't quite do that. But I can show you one that I set up for this demo. So if we have a look, this is an octocat.js. I'll tell you a story about that in one sec. But there is private vulnerability reporting turned on, and we can see private vulnerability reports that people have submitted as well. This one's actually gone all the way through. So this was opened around Universe time, and there's a description that the user has filled in. This is a non-member of this organization, not Damian Brady. No idea who that is. And it describes what the vulnerability is, but it means that the team responsible for that repository can then publish a CVE. Now, this looks really official, right? This GitHub staff commented, published the CVE. Turns out when I was recording this, I actually published a real security vulnerability. So this is actually a real CVE that I released by mistake while I was recording some videos for Universe. So I have published a CVE in real life. I shouldn't have, but I did. So this works really well. It really shortens that loop and means that you don't have to go outside of GitHub to communicate with people reporting security vulnerabilities. It makes the process a lot more streamlined and it's a lot safer. So that's one thing. The other one is CodeQL. So security scanning for kind of unknown security vulnerabilities, where it's actually looking up what vulnerabilities there are based on the code that you've written. Now, there's no good example in octocat.js. Let me just quickly go to this Skyline one. And we can see in security, we've got some security vulnerability here. So our code scanning. Now, CodeQL now supports Ruby, which is really handy for GitHub, actually, because GitHub is a Ruby code base primarily. And we can see that the CodeQL run has identified some issues here. And we can see what the problem is. The URL depends on the user provided value, and even look up the known security vulnerability and why it's a problem. So Ruby is supported by that as well. Just for reference as well, the other things that we offer in GitHub Security are Dependabot and secret scanning. Secret scanning is available for free on all public repositories. And Dependabot, which looks at your dependencies and whether there are known vulnerabilities in those dependencies, it's available for all repositories regardless of whether they're public or private. And that's both the alerts, so letting you know that there is a vulnerability in one of your dependencies, as well as pull requests. So the security updates, where GitHub Dependabot will automatically submit a pull request to fix or upgrade your dependency if it can. So that happens automatically, or you can turn that on for all public and private repos for Dependabot. All right, so that's security. A couple of other things I really wanted to note as well. We're investing really heavily in the community in general. So GitHub kind of prides itself on being the home for open source. So we've done a couple of things to put our money where our mouth is. GitHub Accelerator was one of those things. It is basically a program that offers stipends for 20 maintainers to help grow their open source projects. Now, that application, I think, ended in December, but there is still an apply now button. So the winter 2023 cohort has closed, but keep an eye on that for, this is US winter, by the way. That has closed now, but keep an eye on future efforts there. There is also the GitHub Fund. So the M12 GitHub Fund from Microsoft Ventures. So this is a $10 million fund. We've contributed $10 million to this fund to help grow open source projects as well. So there's a lot of stuff we're doing in the community in that respect as well. So Those are a few of the things I mentioned. One of the things you probably noticed I didn't mention was code spaces. Now, this is one of the big announcements. The biggest announcement I thought, in my mind at least at Universe, was that all individual users of GitHub are now entitled to up to 60 free hours per month of GitHub code spaces. So what that means is that you can actually use code spaces for your side projects or your main job, anything that you need to use code spaces on. Now, code spaces is basically a development environment in the cloud, and it is extremely useful. I actually worked out on a plane late last year that the last time I cloned a repository locally was probably about 12 months earlier. Now, admittedly, I don't have to pay for code spaces. I'm lucky I work for the company that owns it, so I don't have to pay for it. But now that is available to everybody without paying for up to 60 hours. So code spaces are really handy for being able to pick up work and then drop it and move on to something else. That environment, that code spaces environment, is really tuned to the work that you're doing at the time, and you can spin them up and tear them down really quickly. To demonstrate, I like to actually do this live. So if we just create a code space for this Haikus for Code Spaces project that I have, and I don't believe there's any special, I don't have any configuration here specific for that Haikus for Code Spaces. So this is the out of the box behavior. Oh, sorry. Spec and mirrors there, even though it might have looked very quick. It's actually spun up a brand new code space for me straight away. And we can see we're already into VS Code. Yeah. Now this is in my dark mode because I think I have settings sync turned on. I'll just keep zooming in because it's a little bit small. We'll be able to see pretty soon that this will spin up. So right now we're setting up the remote connection to this new machine that's been spun up specifically for this project. Now, what's great with a code space is it's essentially a machine that's running in the cloud. So there is a back end there as well, which means you can install extensions. You can debug. You can do all of the things that you would really want to do for your main development. Now, I'm doing this in a browser, so it's Visual Studio Code in the browser with all of that stuff turned on, but I could also use VS Code locally and connect to a code space remotely as well. All right, here we go. So we are on the default image, which has a bunch of stuff on it here. And you can see I've actually got a file system. So I'm running in my workspace. So in my code space, there's a real machine behind the scenes. The other thing I can do, this is always dangerous when I test this, but let's just run and debug. Let's see if we can run that project. It's a Node.js one. Can I do that? We're already running. Oh, there we go. It's a Node.js project, Haikus for Code Spaces. And so this is, again, running in the cloud. And it should, in a second, point me at the running application on port 3000. Now, remember, this is port 3000 on that remote machine. So I am being forwarded via a URL to port 3000 here, and you can see that. Now, to prove it, just because it does look a little bit magic, let's just go to our index.js, and then when we render, I'm just going to put a breakpoint there, and we'll refresh. You can see even in the little icon here that we've hit that breakpoint, and we can see all of the details here. So we can debug the way we normally would. Now, this is the out-of-the-box code space as well, and there's a lot of work being done around dev containers. So a dev container is basically a definition of what the development environment should look like for a particular project. So we could start from scratch and create a dev container. And then it's recommended Alpine, but maybe we could do Azure Functions and Node, or just a Debian one, so on. So we can build these dev containers. Once we have a dev container definition, any code space that's created for that project from that point on will use that dev container. So we can really tune this environment for everybody working on our project. Now, one of the other really cool things that we announced was code spaces are available not just for VS Code, but also for things like Jupyter Notebooks. So there's also quick start templates. So we can, even without creating a repository, we can say, well, I want to try out Preact, and it'll spin up a code space for Preact without a repository in the background, but with everything set up so we can really just get going. And then, of course, once we get to a certain point, if we want to continue that in a repository, we can just save that to a repository and continue from there. But before we go into that, I just want to show you one of the things that we can do now. So I have been playing with Stable Diffusion, which is quite cool. And I've been using Jupyter Notebooks to do that. You can see here that we can open it in the browser like we were doing before, in VS Code on my desktop, in the JetBrains suite of tools as well, or even in Jupyter Lab. So actually, I'm just going to jump. I don't have it open, so let's just do that. I thought I had that one open, but I don't. No worries. Let's just spin up that code space and do it directly. So the great thing about Jupyter Notebooks, or doing this in Jupyter Lab, is if you're a data scientist and this is where you're used to working in Jupyter Lab, you don't have to relearn a new IDE. You don't have to relearn VS Code. You can just use the tool that you're most used to. You can also talk to a code space using the GitHub CLI. You can even SSH into a code space as well if you really want. Now this is just loading up Jupyter Lab. There we go. And I've got Stable Diffusion, which is a AI art generation tool working. Let's just scroll past all the setup stuff. And then here's a photo of a modern city at night, but I don't know, let's just say a photo of a planet surrounded by satellites, and we'll run that. Now again, this is running in a code space in the cloud, but this time the machine I'm using is a GPU-enabled machine. Oh, there we go, I needed to run everything else again. So you saw it working before. I think I might have to just run this all. I don't know if we've got time for that, but we'll see if this is going to start doing scratch. It might do. All right, we can skip that. Let's save it. Try one more just in case it won't. In case it doesn't load everything. Should be okay. All right, and then let's try that again one more time. Photo of a planet surrounded by satellites. Let's see if it'll actually do it. There we go. It's doing 50 iterations of this. And let's see if we can actually get a result at the other end. There we go. Great. So the cool thing about this is I don't even need to have a GPU on my local machine. I'm just using a code space with the resources that I need. And I get, there we go. It's an okay job. Not entirely what I asked for, but that's AI generated art for you. So I don't need the hardware. I can use that in the cloud. And as well as that, if I'm finished with this project, I can just turn it off and I only get charged or get usage for the storage of that code space while it's turned off. Now, by default, it'll turn itself off. It'll stop it after 30 minutes of inactivity, but you can change those settings as well to make them less than that or more than that, both at the repository level and also at the the user level and also at the org level. So you can set profiles for people using code spaces in your organization too. So yeah, CodeSpace is an amazing tool. I use it constantly for everything that I do. And that is the main demo that I wanted to show you. All of these things together though, and I really want to highlight this, kind of tie into a message that Thomas Domke, the CEO of Microsoft, sorry, CEO of GitHub, said in the keynote as well, is that we are kind of entering a new age of development where we want everything to be streamlined from start to finish. So it's not enough to have a really good IDE, but then your build tools are a little bit painful, or they're living in a different place, or that your planning and tracking lives over here, and that's handled by a different team than the people doing the development. We kind of want this streamlined all-in-one project, and that's really what GitHub is trying to do with all of these announcements. So again, have a look at that blog, have a look through everything that's new. If you're interested as well, on the github.blog, if you go to changelog, you can see all of the releases that have happened in a big timeline. So you can catch up with anything that you've missed as well. So I hope that was valuable. Check out the blog post. If you have any questions, I am here.
Hello, everybody. Hey, that was a bit of a weird way to end that segment. Apologies for cutting you off there, Damian, but we are now live at our Q&A section for today's show. So welcome back to the show, Damian.
Thanks.
All right. Look, we had some good questions come through in the chat during the video there. So let's get into it. There was a fantastic question around, using Copilot and the implications of taking that Copilot generated code and pushing it to production, and what are the risks involved with that. And you and I were chatting about this behind the scenes, so I would be interested to hear your thoughts on that. I have my thoughts, but I don't work for GitHub, so I'll let you lead with the discussion on this one.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so I think that question was around worrying about security vulnerabilities and things like that for just picking up code that Copilot suggests and including that in your code base. I think the first thing we need to remember is that Copilot is just a tool. It's like a very advanced kind of IntelliSense or autocomplete. So just with those tools, so just the same as those tools, just blindly accepting what it gives you is not a great way of operating, right? It's exactly the same way as you wouldn't do a search on Stack Overflow or something like that and then just copy and paste the code verbatim without trying to understand what it's doing. So that's kind of the underlying current. Copilot definitely helps you with these things like boilerplate code and saves you time, basically lets you write the code that is interesting and the code that you're required to write as an intelligent person. So that role as a developer is still there. Copilot is just a tool. That said, yesterday you might have seen that we released Copilot for Business. And one of the things that we announced alongside that was some improvements to the AI model and a few other things like that, performance and some AI improvements. One of the improvements, though, was also some security vulnerability checking. So what happens now is that Copilot will look for security vulnerabilities, and common security vulnerabilities like SQL injection or including credentials in the code that you write and things like that. And it will block those suggestions from being given to you. So obviously it's not perfect. It's not going to catch everything, but it's good to know that Copilot at least is not just blindly suggesting, here is a piece of code that's vulnerable to SQL injection because it's all over the internet and that's the way people do it. It'll look for those and block it. So we're making improvements there as well. But yeah, the underlying message is whatever Copilot suggests, you do need to have a look at what it's suggesting, just like any other tool or any other web search, and make your own judgments on whether that is the right piece of code at that time.
And I think just to sort of the follow on from that is, there have been a lot of developer assistance tooling and extensions over the years, pre-Copilot. And I would say the same is applied there as well, right? It's like that right-click magic inside of your IDE that refactors your code. If you're not understanding what that refactoring is actually doing and just accepting it because it compiles and it runs, then there's some challenges there. And I'd also hope, in those environments where you are building and deploying software to production environments, you are doing, due diligence around unit testing, potentially security fuzzing. Maybe you're using something like CodeQL and GitHub Advanced Security to scan your code for vulnerabilities before you push it to production. And that should apply to any code, regardless of the source of that code, whether it's through a great assistive tool like Copilot or through any of the other multitude of tools that are out there. So I think if you're right-clicking and deploying to production, which I know is absolutely not your favorite thing, Damian, then you may potentially already be facing those issues, even with shall we say human written and generated code. as it exists right now. It's an interesting topic, and I think one that's very top of mind right now, particularly through the focus on, all of the great work that OpenAI is doing in other areas, and the underlying models supporting Copilot, helping deliver those benefits to developers. And we could talk for infinite time on that, but I think let's tie it up in a bow and just kind of say, it'll help you. It gives you suggestions. It's still down to the individual to decide, or the team to decide the appropriateness of those suggestions. And GitHub is working hard to ensure that what people are seeing isn't going to, trip them up. But it's not foolproof.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you wanted to learn more about the improvements that came out really recently, I think you were going to put that link in the show notes.
Yes,
well.
I'll chuck it up. I'll chuck it up in the show notes. It's not there at the moment. The show notes have been published, but as this has come up during the show today, I will push that out just after the show this morning. And I'm just going to have a quick look, see if there's any other questions. No, there's no other questions. I know you kind of touched on there as the last part of your demo around code spaces, and I saw a comment from you online this week. I think you said something along the lines of, I just got a new machine, or I've had a new machine for a while, and I realized, and don't jump off the stream when I say this, you say, I don't think I even have Git installed locally because I've just been working with code spaces. So that might be an odd idea to a lot of people who are on the stream who maybe have desktops or laptops that they still build on. But what's been your experience with that? Sounds like you've been quite productive.
Yeah, I mean, I do have the advantage that I've been able to use Copilot without paying for it for some time. Obviously, working for GitHub means that, and especially in the role that I'm in, means that I do get access to a lot of these tools and a lot of these features early. So for the last year or so, I've basically been using code spaces and GitHub.dev. So if you hit the full stop, the dot on any repo, it's just a lightweight web-based browser. I've basically been using them for everything that I do. Now, I'll preface that by saying I'm not writing production code at the moment, and that's to everyone's benefit, I think. But even the GitHub.com team, so the team that writes GitHub itself, they use code spaces exclusively now for the vast majority of that product. So what that's meant is that to edit a quick README file or something like that, or even a YAML file, something like that, I can just hit dot and go to GitHub.dev. If I need to do some debugging, then I can open that in a code space. And I don't really need to worry about what's on my local machine. Now that's popped up a couple of times when I realized I don't have a local copy of my code. And I got a new laptop for various reasons a couple of months ago, and I went to open VS Code to do some text editing, basically just some text manipulation on a file that I had just locally. But I realized I didn't have VS Code installed, which is strange after a couple of months. Yeah. So I installed that, and then extensions wouldn't work because I didn't have Git installed. And I went, oh, okay, well then it's a Mac. And so I was like, oh, Homebrew install Git, and Homebrew wasn't installed. And by this time I'm deep in that rabbit hole of how did I not have anything on here? But the reality is I just haven't needed it. I've still been as productive as I was before, purely relying on GitHub.dev and code spaces. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's changed the way that I work, and I know internally it's changed the way a lot of our engineers work as well. You just spin stuff up on a code space. So,
I think it's going to be transformative. I think in large organizations as well, where they maybe have, and a lot of people would look at this and go, oh, this is only for kind of greenfields, net new, modern app dev. And while it's not suited to every type of application development that there is today, I can see a lot of scenarios where you may have even legacy code bases where you might be running an old version of a particular SDK. You can create a dev container image, you can create a code space image, you can pre-configure it with all the necessary bits and pieces in it. Yeah. And then basically that's your entry point to doing work on the legacy code base. So then you're not having to keep multitudes of frameworks installed locally and configurations, and that's the big tripping point in complex environments, is the time to change between projects, the inevitable conflicts between assemblies or node modules and all those sorts of fun things, and even maybe just not having the capacity to install all that stuff locally. So I think we are still in the early stages of that journey. I think, as you said, the GitHub team and yourself are lucky because you have the freedom to do that because of the way you work. But I think we are going to see more of that over the coming period as people come to realise that they get flexibility out of this, not just for brand new stuff, but also for stuff they might have been working on for a while. I can see that. Sorry, I was just
going to say it's worth noting as well that at Universe we did announce Codespace's entitlements, I guess, for everybody in an individual account. So while that was my experience because GitHub was paying for the Codespace's usage, now that's kind of available to everyone. So the the barrier to entry is much lower now.
Yeah, and I think that starting even with just GitHub.dev, now being able to fork a repository and then poke at it, right, and figure out how it hangs together, how it compiles, how it works, and then additionally being able to run it in a code space. I think that's going to be a massive opportunity for people who are new to industry to quickly get up to speed with things, because now you no longer have to have a complex set of build tools and what have you locally. You can just connect to a web browser and do it all remotely. So I think that's going to be beneficial in the long term as well. I was just going to acknowledge we did have an extra question come in during this section. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get to that question, but what I will do is Damian and I will have a chat after this, and we'll chuck it up in the show notes and answer up there. That's pretty much it for today's show. Damian, I did want to thank you very much for coming along today.
Of course. Always good to be here.
Yep, and as I've just mentioned, check out the show notes. The link should be in the chat. The video link will be updated on the show notes as well once it's published on YouTube in a couple of weeks' time. But thanks a lot, everybody, for coming along to this edition of New Breakpoint. Thanks, Damian, again, and we will see everybody at the next episode. Until then, bye for now.
Thanks. See you later.